Welcome to Conversations, Lehman College's series of discussions with major theater and musical figures of our time. Our guest today, for the first of a two-part chat, is noted British playwright Sir Arnold Wesker. Welcome to Conversations, Sir Arnold.
Thank you for inviting me.
The last time I saw you was in Valdez, Alaska. Now doesn't that sound weird?
It sounds exotic, and it was exotic when I first went there, and it remains exotic. I'd like to go back again.
It's no longer the Edward Albee Festival up there. They're now doing it in Nebraska, another exotic location. But I would rather go back to Valdez, Alaska, wouldn't you?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. But they do something there. They're doing something with young playwrights,
right,
and people like us to come and comment, and that's what I heard.
Well, I have to check that out. Most recently, I saw a brilliant play of yours called Shylock. Theater for the what is the name?
Theater for New Audiences.
Theater for New Audiences did a reading of it, which affected me deeply. Let me put it that way. I thought it was a very important play, and I understand the play was about to be done, premiered on Broadway, starring Zero Mostel.
Yeah, and he died in the after giving one performance. I mean, we rehearsed for 5 weeks in New York. This is my claim to fame in New York. I killed Zero Mostel. We rehearsed for 5 weeks in New York and then opened in Philadelphia, where he gave one performance, fell ill, and died. And we had to start all over again. The big problem was who should we have to replace him? And I'm afraid John Dexter and myself, both of us, suffered from hubris. John wanted to prove that he could make a play work on Broadway without a star, and I wanted to prove that my play was the star.
Right.
Silly, foolish. Mm-hmm. And so we worked with the understudy, and John got a very fine performance out of him, Joe Leon. But we turned down Danny Kaye, for example.
Ah.
I know, Danny Kaye was a childhood hero of mine, but I just couldn't see him doing Shylock. Maybe I was wrong.
That would have been fantastic casting, as a matter of fact.
It would have been, and I'd have been a much wealthier man than I am today.
That's amazing. First of all, tell us what this extraordinary play is about.
Well, it's not, as some journalists described it, it's not an adaptation of Shakespeare's Merchant of Venice. Shakespeare used 3 stories to write The Merchant of Venice, 3 extant stories, one about a daughter running away from her father, another about 3 caskets, and the 3rd story about a pound of flesh, which I think was a bond between a monk and someone else, and not a Jew originally. But anyway, Shakespeare used those 3 stories to write one play, and I used those stories to write a completely different play. All I did vis-a-vis the Shakespeare was borrow some of his names and 6 of his lines, those awful whitewashing lines, "Hath not a Jew eyes," which everybody loves, and everybody thinks is a vindication of the plays.
I don't think so.
No, I don't think so. I mean, Cynthia Ozick said that, you can make the same claims for a chimpanzee. Anyway, so I gave those lines to a religious fanatic, Lorenzo, in the play, and my Shylock, who is a friend of Antonio's, has these words, and Shylock rails against them. What's this fool talking about? Which is really very naughty, because it's kind of saying, what's this fool Shakespeare talking about? Now, I don't believe that The Merchant of Venice is an intentionally anti-Semitic play. Shakespeare's genius is too generous for him to be as narrow-minded and bigoted. But I think it was a commercial play. He wanted to write a commercial potboiler, and the Jew was a popular villain, and so he chose the Jew. And although it isn't intended to be anti-Semitic, I believe its impact is anti-Semitic.
It's unquestionably, its impact has been anti-Semitic. There's no, how can anyone argue about that?
Right. And I first thought about the play when I saw Jonathan Miller's production with Laurence Olivier. Mm-hmm. And Olivier was giving a stereotypical performance of an oi, oi, oi Jew. And it was while watching it that I suddenly had an idea that it could be directed in a different way. So that when Portia says to Shylock, hold on, you can't have this pound of flesh without drawing blood, Shylock would say, thank God. Thank God I don't have to take human life. And someone said to me, an actor actually, when I talked to him about the idea, he said, you'll have to rewrite it. And so I thought, why not? Not rewrite it, but write a completely original play, which I did.
Well, if it was good enough for Shakespeare to do that, why not you?
Right.
I'm all for rewriting the classics myself. I did Tony Holland and I made a sequel to the Cherry Orchard called After the Orchard. There's so much about your career that I find personally fascinating, that you started writing on subjects about your Jewish childhood in London, being of East European descent. Which part of East Europe, do you know?
Yeah, my mother came from Transylvania, which delights my daughter that she had a grandmother that came from the land of the vampires. And my father came from the Ukraine. My mother's village was Jedzior St. Miklosh, and my father's town was Dnepropetrovsk.
And you wrote about your childhood brilliantly, and you had a communist mother.
Yeah.
Now, in America, it sounds so odd to say your mother was a communist. Those are almost dangerous words still to say.
Still?
Usually what one says is, oh, my mother was progressive. My mother was a leftist. But my mother was a communist is very rarely heard. So well, I was just shocked to hear that.
I think that I mean, Chicken Soup, we're talking about a play called Chicken Soup with Barley.
Yes.
And I first asked a director called Lindsay Anderson, who subsequently became a very eminent film director. I asked Lindsay to read this play because at the time I was studying film technique. I was going to be a film director. And I wrote, my first play was a play called The Kitchen, which I wrote for a play competition. It didn't win any prizes, so I thought I wasn't a playwright. But then I saw Look Back in Anger, the John Osborne play, and I was very turned on by that and thought the theatre was somewhere where things could happen. And I met Lindsay Anderson because he came to lecture at the School of Film Technique. And I asked him would he read this play, and he agreed. And he read it and wrote me a wonderful letter saying, you really are a playwright, aren't you? Why don't can I have your permission to show this play to the Royal Court Theatre? Yes, of course. Why say no? And the Royal Court were very uncertain about it. And I think part of their uncertainty was the Jewish milieu that was kind of alien to them, and also that it had a communist heroine, and also that it covered 20 years. It spanned 20 years, right. Which was very filmic. So it had a checkered launching. The court didn't do it. They gave it to a theatre, a new theatre in Coventry, right. To put it on for a week in Coventry and bring it to the court for a week. So yes, but it made a great impact.
I would like to, at this point, show examples of your early work, The Kitchen and Chicken Soup with Barley. Can we roll them back to back?
I make it, Paul. I make it. Hello.
She does not look handsome. I'm sorry for that.
Ah, you good boy, Dimitri. Here, can we play it? Anyone around? Is Moran go around yet?
Not yet.
It's mine. Dimitri here made it.
You made it on your own? All those wires and plugs? Tell me, what are you doing here? Why you waste your time with dishes in this place, huh? You can't get a job in a factory?
A factory? You think I find happiness in a factory? What I make there, huh? You see this little wire? This I could make. Or this, what you call it? Knob. Knob. All day long, I fix in knobs. Perhaps I make knobs. I tell you, in a factory, a man makes a little piece till he becomes a little piece. You know what I mean? Hey, come on, Dad.
That I can't wait to meet that neon shine. That neon shine.
Marango's in the dining room. What? Marango's in the dining room.
It's only me. Good morning, gentlemen.
The veal is there.
Thank you, thank you.
Alfredo.
Morning, Bertha.
There's a new cook here.
You didn't ask for me.
Hey, Monique, what happened last night? You tell us.
Oh, no more, Ray. There's a good man. Gaston has a black eye.
Right, boy, we're going to have this morning, then.
Yeah, but Peter, nothing.
He was lucky.
You mean he was with you so they couldn't touch him?
I mean, he was lucky. They waited for him outside.
Outside also?
You want to play gangsters, he says to them. Go bring me Marlon Brando, then I'll play gangsters.
Time like that, he's funny.
And then he shakes hands with them and says, good night, bon nuit, good nacht, and Cali Nicta, one by one. And he leaves them all standing. What could they do? The bully.
Wesker went on to write Chicken Soup with Barley, a hit play of the 1950s that could only have been written by a child of communism.
Oh, and don't move. Not on the careful. On the blood. Oh, mess you're in.
Oh, I fooled you. They told me you were hurt. I nearly died.
Now, look, I was only hit by a truncheon. Now, do me a favour, sir, and just make some tea.
The great ideal you always cherished has exploded in front of your face, and you just won't face it. You just refuse to face it. Now, I don't know how you do it. You just do. You just do. Now, you're a pathological case, Mother. Do you know that? You're still a communist.
All right, so I'm still a communist. So shoot me then. I'm a communist.
It must be very difficult to know what's going on.
It is hard.
From those extracts.
I was struck by the use of the word communist so boldly, and what was it like to grow up in this milieu in England?
Well, it was, first of all, can I briefly point out that the play is about the disintegration of a family set against the background of the disintegration of an ideology. And it starts with the years of idealism, the time of the Spanish Civil War, and a very important anti-fascist demonstration in the East End of London to stop Sir Oswald Mosley and his black shirts marching through. And the Dockers came out, and the Jewish community. And it's a very famous demonstration, very well documented. And it ends with Hungary 20 years later.
When it was revealed to the world at large, especially the leftist world at large, that the communist system was bankrupt.
Bankrupt, and and Stalin had committed all those atrocities. So I grew up against that political background with parents who were communists, with aunts and uncles and cousins who were communists and young communists. And I must say it was a very happy upbringing. I mean, we were impoverished, really poor as church mice. And I once had to sell a small stamp collection in order that we had some lunch. But it was a happy background. It was happy because people were intellectually energetic and curious and full of opinions, and there were wonderful quarrels that took place, and there were meetings in our attic apartment, and I always wanted to get out of bed and be with everybody and was indulged. So my memory of it is a very happy and stimulating
It must have been terribly disillusioning, though, when the Hungarian Revolution happened.
Oh, it was. It really it affected me severely. And I quarreled with my mother. Really terrible quarrels we had.
I gather she didn't buy the...
No, look, my mother was
she was a true believer.
Yes, but a lovely, simple woman who believed that they didn't land on the moon, but that it was a capitalist plot to distract the workers from the real issues of the day. But what was heroic about her was really her beliefs in just the importance of justice and the possibility of human brotherhood. And we once had a terrible quarrel in which she said something, well, actually she delivered a monologue, and it struck me as a very courageous monologue. I was really impressed that she held on to beliefs that other people had destroyed. And that quarrel became the starting point for writing the play. How did this woman still hold on to her beliefs? And the play goes back 20 years to explain it.
That's a wonderful idea for a play. Now, you're our first foreigner on the show. Our first title...
Foreigner?
Foreigner.
Don't be silly, I'm English, I can't be foreign.
You're our first titled person. It's very exciting. You received your knighthood last year. How did you react to that?
Well,
I've always been dying to ask that question of someone who received the title.
I saw it as an acknowledgement of achievement. And I was really gratified to be acknowledged for the work that I'd done in the theatre. But you know, the first question everybody asked me was, what do you think your mother would have said?
And what do you think she would have said?
Well, I think she'd have been both proud and bewildered. Mm-hmm. There's a level at which she wouldn't have understood it. She'd have worried that I was somewhere up there where it was easy for them to get me. They will get you in the end. She was very Jewish as well as being a communist, and very English Jewish. Mm-hmm. Unlike the American Jews who were very loud, the English Jews were very quiet. You say very little. Shh, shh. Don't speak too loudly, they will get you.
You had fantastic success you've had fantastic success and fantastic productivity. 42 plays, 4 volumes of short stories, 2 volumes of essays, 3 books of nonfiction, a children's book, an autobiography.
And recently a novel, my first novel.
And a novel now. What's the novel called?
The novel's called Honey. Chicken Soup with Barley is the first play in a trilogy of plays.
Yes.
The middle play is a play about a farm labourer's daughter who falls in love with a boy from Chicken Soup with Barley. And the play is about self-discovery. She discovers her own voice at the end of the play, which is to simplify what the play is about. And I've often wondered what happened to Beatty Bryant, that's her name. What would she have done at the end of the play, rather like you did with the Chekhov. And so I wrote a novel about Beatty Bryant, the heroine of Roots, the second play. And it's a sort of, she goes back to education and passes exams and gets an entrance into Oxford University. And the novel opens where she comes out of university and goes into life and what happens to her.
Do you have a theme or a set of themes that you mainly focus on in your work?
No, I'd like to think I've covered the gamut. Political disillusion, failed love, old age, confronting death. You know, I could list a lot of dissimilar themes, but varied.
When you were a young playwright, you started to be known as, I believe, as one of the angry young men, along with John Osborne, who wrote Look Back in Anger. Is this a title that, or an appellation that you were happy with, or?
No.
No.
No, it was an anchor around our necks. I mean, it was, John was the one who was at fault. In his autobiography, a wonderful 2-volume autobiography, beautifully written, he tells the story of how when Look Back in Anger was about to be done at the Royal Court, George Fearon, the press representative, called him aside and said, look, I have to publicize this play somehow or other. I don't really like it, he said. But do you mind if I call you an angry young man? And Osborne said, I don't care what you call me as long as you publicize the play. And that became an anchor around the necks of all of us who came.
You all had to look surly for the next 10 years.
What?
You had to look surly for the next 10 years.
Surly. People said, are you still angry? We were never angry. I mean, we were successful. We were earning a lot of money. Notice was being taken of what we had written, so why should we be angry?
I've been given notice that we're coming to the end of our first part, but I wanted to hear you read. It'll be a treat for us to hear from Love Letters on Blue Papers. Could you read from that?
Love Letters on Blue Paper is a play about a trade union leader who's dying of leukemia, and he doesn't tell his wife. He doesn't want his wife to know. So he calls a young protege to his bedside in order to discuss with him the big issues of is there a life hereafter? And meanwhile, these letters on blue paper keep arriving from his wife, who writes them in the study downstairs, posts them, and then brings them to him with the rest of the post. And there are 8 letters, and this is the 5th letter. And we realize by the end that she knows he's dying, and that what these letters are doing are preparing him for death by reminding him what a wonderful life they had together. On the day we got married, I thought you hated me. I must tell you that because it's the only time I've ever seen hate in your eyes. What am I doing, marrying a man who hates me, I thought to myself. You were so silent, so angry. But afterwards, well, I didn't ever say, but I used never to be able to take my eyes off you. No one had ever been so tender and certain. And you used to sing. Once a visitor came from abroad, I can't remember where, France, I think, and he said to me, good God, there's someone who can still sing. Our son sang also. I remember we'd wake and find him standing up in his cot, looking down at us, not crying, not murmuring nor nothing, just patiently waiting for us to wake up. And when we did, he was the first thing we looked at, and he knew it and waited for it, and then gave us a slow smile and started to hum. Nearly every morning was like that. You were daft about our son, wanted him to be a composer. You used to play classical records in the bedroom while he was asleep. It's best it sinks into him unconsciously, you said. Weird theories you had. You wouldn't ever tell him to think of music as a career. That would put him off. But if it went in, she can't remember the word. She knows it begins with S. She goes to the dictionary. Now, what was that word he used? Began with an S. P-Q-R-S-S-S-I. Siderite? A steel-colored stone? Well, it wasn't that. Sibilate? To hiss? Wasn't that either. What a lot of lovely words. Solatium, a sum of money paid for injured feelings. Solatzi, a stick of licorice. Licorice? I always thought the word was licorice. I'm sure it was. She flicks back to the elves. Lichen, lichgate, licit, lick, lickpenny, ah. Licorice. To be good at cooking, at preparing dainties. Stopped using in 1600. Used licorice instead. Did they now? And what else have I been missing all these years, I wonder? Ah, she finds it. Subliminal. That's what it was. Subliminally. That would put him off. But if it went in subliminally, there. See what writing to you does for me? Where was I? Music. There was one day, my God, don't I remember that day? The children must have been about 9 and 11, and you took us on a climb at the peaks. Dangerous old route you took us. You were scared too. You won't remember it, but you got us on a tricky part where you had to go back and forwards across a gap 4 times in order to help me and the children, and you were sweating. The children thought it was great fun. They would. You would never let them be frightened of anything. Not always a good thing, I thought. Still, I remember that trip for 3 reasons. The dangerous climb was one. The other was you letting out by accident that you'd had a girlfriend before me who'd climbed with you on that same walk. You blushed when you realized it had been let out. In fact, I wasn't sure if you were talking about a girlfriend before me or after me. And the third thing was the song we sang at the top when we got there. We ate sandwiches and there was a big wind and you cried out like a madman, "We must sing against the wind, good for the lungs and the spirit." So you taught us around. The words were, "By the waters of Babylon, we lay down and wept, for these I am. Thee remember, thee remember, thee remember, these I am." What did it mean? I never knew what it meant. Not all this time. We wept for these I am. What are these I am? Do you think you got it wrong? We all used to get songs wrong as children. I used to think it was Good King Wenceslas last looked out, instead of Good King Wenceslas last looked out. Perhaps it should have been the Zion. Perhaps we should have wept for the Zion. Or no, now I come to think of it, you were probably right after all, and we wept because I am these things, we are these things, all are these things.
Beautiful. They're telling me you have to bring this first part to a close, Sir Arnold. Thank you so much for joining us today on our show, Conversations. And thank our studio and home audiences. We hope to see you again soon for further conversations.